Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this leadership panel, which is a part of the World Economic Forum 2021 Davos agenda. My name is Sally Bundock. I'll be moderating this discussion this afternoon. I work for BBC World News. I present the early morning news and business programs. It's an early morning if you're watching in Europe. Of course, it depends on where you are and what time you're tuning in the day. Anyway, every year, the World Economic Forum in Davos is a big part of my agenda. And if we wind the clock back 12 months ago to when some of us were all gathered in that beautiful, idyllic ski resort in Switzerland, I'm sure that most of you would say that we would never have predicted the 12 months that we have all experienced. For most of us, it's been extremely challenging at the very least. For some, it's been absolutely devastating. For example, in the UK this week, we reached the grim milestone of more than 100,000 deaths due to COVID-19. And in the light of the last 12 months and its impact, we have got a great lineup of global leaders to speak this afternoon, to share their expertise, their insights, and we're talking about skilling the global workforce. There is currently a double disruption underway, of course, the pandemic, but also technological change. And the recent WEF jobs report showed the net outlook for jobs may still be positive. That's provided we invest in education, skills, and jobs creation. Earlier today, I was tuning in to one of the sessions here as part of the Davos agenda. It was on the same subject, skilling of the global workforce. And Guy Ryder was speaking on that panel, Director General of the International Labour Organization. And I just want to quote a few things he said to put it in perspective. He basically presented what the global pandemic has done in terms of challenge by saying 225 million full-time jobs have been lost around the world in the last 12 months, and 81 million people have become inactive in the labour force in the last year. That's just a couple of the issues, but gives us a sense of the challenge and the task ahead. So before I introduce the speakers, I'd just like to say to you all, it's great that you've tuned into this panel and joining us for this really important discussion. And please do be involved and tell us your thoughts, your comments, your questions, and we'll try and include you as much as possible. So do that via top link, or you can also do that via the Zoom chat. And we have people from WEF who are watching everywhere, so they can pass on questions to me that I may have missed coming through. So we'd love to hear from you. Do get involved. So let me introduce you to our fantastic panelists. I'm delighted to tell you, first up, we have Anhil Guria, who is the Secretary General of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. We also have Bandar Hajar, who's president of the Islamic Development Bank, joining us from Saudi Arabia. We have Frida Poli, who is co-founder and chief executive of Pi Metrics. She's joining us from Manhattan in the US, and also joining us from Milwaukee in the US, we have Jonas Priesing, Chairman and Chief Executive of Manpower. It's really great that all of you could spare the time this afternoon for this really important discussion. So if I begin with Secretary General Guria, if I start with you, and if you could set the scene in a sense. Now, while COVID-19 crisis has had a profound impact on the labour market, there's no doubt about that. Disruptions to jobs were already well underway prior to this happening. And so what policies and models will be critical to shape an inclusive and sustainable recovery going forward?
You're right, Sally. The crisis is largely accelerating changes that were already happening before the pandemic. In particular, one ongoing change was the worsening situation of low-skilled workers, largely as a result of digitalization and automation. Now, the share of high-skilled jobs has grown by about 25% in OECD countries over the past 2 decades. Skilled workers have enjoyed strong real wage gains. And in the meantime, low-skilled workers have seen their real wages stagnate or even decline over a long period. So before the pandemic struck, we already had rising inequalities, shrinking opportunities for low-skilled workers. The crisis has made this worse by battering the overall economy and hitting hardest in sectors where low-skilled workers are disproportionately present, like the restaurants, retail, trade, SMEs, tourism sector, etc. One key to ensuring an inclusive recovery is to minimize what I would call the scarring effect of the crisis. If those who lose their jobs are inactive for a long time, the skills erode and their attachment to the labor market can weaken. And also, those entering the labor force during a crisis are less likely to get the experience and the training that they would get in normal times. This can blight their whole career. As regards what policies can help mitigate such labor market scarring, one key is to have supportive macroeconomic policies, of course, macro labor policies. Scarring partly reflects the fact that unemployment shocks tend to persist, so that macro policies that dampen and shorten the recessions, of course, will help minimize these scarring effects. And of course, job retention schemes, the Kurzarbeit or the chômage partiel here in France, they have been another important policy for mitigating scarring, but also because they found ways in which, in those less hours worked, there is training going on. So the smartest companies, what they do is, yes, they work less hours, but then they help train their workforce, and the payment of those less working hours is spread. And then what happens is that they're better prepared for the recovery. They'll be more productive for the recovery, and they will have a more productive staff, a more productive workforce. The problem, of course, is that those that are already being trained have much greater chance of continuing to be trained than the ones that are not being trained, the ones that are low skilled already, and they have 30 to 40% less chance of actually being trained for what is undoubtedly a future post-COVID, much more digital, much more skills heavy future.
Jonas, if I ask you, because there is, this ongoing conversation about the low-skilled workers, about the poor who've been hit hardest by this pandemic, the inequality that is getting wider and wider. I mean, Oxfam at the beginning of this week put out its analysis saying, the top 10 richest men in the world could pay for everyone to have a vaccine around the world. They've made so much money in the last year, and yet so many have lost their jobs, their livelihoods. In terms of low-skilled workers and training, that they are getting or not getting, do we have a sense of how this is being done in terms of those who are in low-skilled positions?
Well, thank you, Sally. And, I would say that just as the Secretary General described, the areas to really focus on are the low and unskilled workers that are also, during the pandemic, the most disproportionately impacted, and amongst those, women and youth in particular. But I do think that there is cause for optimism. So first of all, over a number of years now, and the OECD has certainly been at the forefront of this, as has the World Economic Forum, more and more interest and focus on this topic has been arising. So the World Economic Forum has launched and is sponsoring an initiative called the Reskilling Revolution, with the idea of helping 1 billion people acquire new skills so they become more employable. I would say employers at large over the last 5 or 6 years have become increasingly interested and involved in the training and development of their employees. And I think the experience that we have as Manpower Group ourselves of moving people from lower or unskilled positions to higher skilled position is also encouraging. We can see that through incremental changes in their skills over a short time period, you can actually move them up to different jobs that are better paying jobs. So all of this is, I would say, good news. In addition to that, of course, the technology that's coming along is going to help enable this transition. The area where we are still lagging, and that's an area that I think needs to be focused on, is policymakers taking this as seriously as they are, for instance, taking climate change. Because we think this is the defining challenge of our time. We can see the K-shaped recovery taking place after and during this pandemic. And that is exactly the polarization that the Secretary General talked about before between those that have the skills and those that don't have the skills, and how they feel left behind. And that polarization of the workforce and labor markets ultimately becomes the polarization of the population that is then reacting to this with tensions. And, we move from a healthcare crisis to an economic crisis into a social crisis. And the area that we need to solve for is to do this at a scale that we've never done before. So companies are doing a good job, individuals are increasingly becoming aware of it, but the transformation mechanisms put in place by governments are not there. Now, you have some exceptions. You have Singapore has their Future Skills initiative. You can see the French government recently announcing their labor market reforms, including giving individuals a portfolio of funds so they can apply that to training. But this is where we need to move from the job protection schemes that are prevalent in most labor markets to employment granting schemes. So not protecting the job, but protecting and enabling the employment, which means you have to move people from jobs that they have into new opportunities. And I think that's what we hope is going to come through with all of the momentum that we're starting and the kind of conversations that we're having during this virtual Davos meeting as well.
President Hajjar, if we get your perspective on this from where you are in Saudi Arabia in the Middle East, there's a lot of discussion, of course, about government having to take real action on this. It's not just up to business leaders and business and employers. Your thoughts?
Thank you, Sally. It is a pleasure to take part in this highly interactive discussion on a very pressing issue. For the Islamic Development Bank's member countries, 57 member countries, and 2/3 of these are least developed countries, and the rest are developing countries. So adapting to the post-COVID-19 world and to the rapid changes driven by technology and preparing themselves for the future is more crucial and more complicated for many reasons. First, the structure of the economy and the structure of the labor market itself. In these countries, the economy is dominated by public sector. The government runs the economy with a small size of private sector, and the third sector is very weak. So the government is the primary employer. So if we want really to prepare the current and future workforce for the future of tomorrow, so this required a robust private sector that lead the economy and encourage human capital investment. And to do so, ISTB have rolled out an ambitious plan in 2018, prior to COVID-19. And this is based on 5 Ps. I mean, public-private, philanthropist, people partnership instead of 3 Ps, public-private partnership, and also based on identifying the sectors that these countries have a comparative advantages, and then we focus in these sectors and see what are the requirements of the job in the future. And second, we launched really many programs that assist our member countries to create a segment of entrepreneurs who can open new markets and create job opportunities in various fields based on innovation, because innovation is the driving force for economic growth and job for the future. And to do so, we created a whole science, technology, and innovation ecosystem with two core initiative Engage platform and $500 million Transform Fund to create innovative ecosystem for engaging and connecting key actors and partners, innovators, investors, academic, philanthropists, startups, private sector, and so on, to create a segment of innovators and entrepreneurs. And these are very important if we really want to change and respond to the future change. Third, the bank also established a scholarship program, provided scholarship to male and female students in member countries. And just last year, we received more than 200,000 interest applications, and we built partnership with the top reputable universities in the world. And we selected 16 fields of specialization, and all of them in line with the future requirement. These are some of our efforts to help reskilling the workforce in order to prepare our member countries for the future. But it is completely different when we talk about policy, about the procedures, when we compare it to the advanced and developing countries. The situation is completely different, and this we can elaborate more on that.
Yeah, it's a very, very diverse region, and we completely appreciate that brings in itself lots of very specific challenges on this. Frida, now, if we bring you in at this conversation, and just from your perspective, you know, you've co-founded, you're running a business that is all about finding the right job, the right fit for the right individual. When it comes to reskilling, talk us through what that means.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So prior to co-founding and running Pymetrics, I was an academic scientist at Harvard and MIT. And really in our research, what global community of scientists have come to realize is that soft skills, what we term soft skills in the HR world, cognitive, social, and emotional aptitudes, really are fairly evenly distributed among the population. So we've heard from other panelists that there's a growing divide between people that have digital skills and those that don't, low skill workers and high skill workers. We don't see that same divide in soft skills, right? So folks that are in the low skill category will have the same soft skill profiles as those that are in the high skill category. So our perspective really is that soft skills is a fantastic way to not only understand what someone's best fit is in the world of work, and all people have many fits in the world of work, but also to act as an equalizing function. And we actually just recently put out a paper with the MIT Work of the Future Task Force outlining this, basically saying that if you only look at hard skills, as we are mentioning on this panel, there continues to be this divide between high and low skill workers. If you then start to look at soft skills and layer that into the equation, so I'm not saying ignore hard skills, because that's obviously an important component of whether someone can do the job or not. But if we layer in a soft skill way of looking at folks, the socioeconomic, inequalities that we see really dramatically lessen. And we see folks that might have been in sort of frontline roles in, hotels or retail, that are actually quite well suited from a soft skills perspective to what we would consider high skilled jobs in digital functions. And so then again, back to what some folks on the panel have been saying, we then need to understand, okay, what are the skilling mechanisms? What are the retraining mechanisms that then can take these folks that are showing high aptitude for high skilled jobs, even though they haven't been in them, and how do we scale them up? And we're excited to be part of a number of initiatives, including at the WEF, that really look at this, right? So the ideal behind looking at soft skills is to understand, okay, great, this person has the aptitude for certain high skill roles. Now let's get them personalized training to do that. And I think, the beauty of technology is that all of these things can be really scalable, right? Imagine sort of personalized training at scale. Once you've understood, hey, Frida is a wonderful fit for this role, even though she's never done it before. Now let's get her in front of, online training and so on and so forth. And all of this can be delivered digitally. So I think just to, make the main point I want to make is that soft skills really have a fantastic equalizing potential. And however you're thinking about looking at soft skills, think of them in that way. And if we really want to try to mitigate inequality, growing inequality, exacerbation of these chasms, we have to look at people's potential through soft skills as a mechanism for doing that.
Yeah, it's a really, really, really valid point and a very important point, because it's often forgotten, those skills, the soft skills that we all have, we all share.
Absolutely.
But wouldn't you say, Frida, that one thing that this pandemic has done is it's forced us, whether we like it or we don't, to get digital, to get into using technology, whether we're a child learning at home or someone like me now moderating a panel via a digital forum. I mean, we have all been forced to learn things that perhaps will enable in a way that we wouldn't have been.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And look, the digital divide is also very real, right? Like access to broadband and other things like that then come into play and will mirror the exacerbations of high versus low skill, access to opportunities. So I think we have to be mindful of the existing inequality that we have, whether it's access to broadband and or access to having historical skilling patterns. But we also have to look at how, sort of the silver lining of how we can start to mitigate these things. And to your point, we've all been forced to do more digitally. Now we just have to ensure that those digital opportunities are equally distributed as well.
Okay, thank you. As Secretary General Gurria, if we bring you back in, I mean, we have been getting various questions through. So some are saying, we've often seen community-specific or country-specific efforts to reskill or upskill workers. For example, it's very good to have country-specific efforts to try and tackle things because of, as President Hajjar was pointing out, each country faces its own challenges. But what are you seeing at the OECD in particular that is working well?
We first of all, let me say, just following up on the comment you made a moment ago, the problem with the low skilled have less opportunities to work from home. The low skilled have to go to the factory, and if the factory is closed, the problem is you can't get there, or you will not be allowed, or conditions may be not hygienic enough. Okay, that has been a problem that we faced when we face with a policy of these different. The differentiation then becomes even greater, precisely because the ones that are more sophisticated can work from home, can then do their computers. But if 40 to 50% of the workforce does not have the necessary skills to work with the computers, then those that are the low skilled will not have the chance to work from home. So the question of country specific, we do every year, we do a skills strategy, we do a skills outlook, we do an employment outlook, which are layers and layers of, and we go national. We've done about 20 analysis of countries so far, where they've conducted phase one, which is a diagnosis. And then they go in some cases for implementation, like Latvia, Portugal, Slovenia, and others. They've gone for the implementation strategy. And this is precisely because right now, the very clear perception, and when we give advice to the countries, is you will never make it in the post-COVID era. You will never make it in the technology era. And this was before COVID, okay? That was already happening. You will never make it if you do not make a specific national policy of training your workforce and specializing your workforce, and also working with the private sector, asking them, what is it about? Asking the Jonas Pricing, to saying, what's going on? What is needed? What is going to be required? Asking the CBI in the UK, the Confederation of British Industries, what types of skills do you need 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, and then getting to that, because you no longer want to be educating per education, per se. You want to be educating with a purpose. You want to be educating so that when they go out of school, they have the skills, they have the knowledge, or at least they have the capacity to turn the knowledge into skills when receiving the proper training, so that they can thrive, so that they can make it in a much more competitive environment.
All right.
So go national, go national, go national. Absolutely have to do it, but in a broader context. We have enough knowledge and that we can now say what works better. What are the activation policies? What are the best skills policies? What works and what doesn't work with digital strategies and activation strategies, et cetera. So that is not a mystery anymore. The question is, now you have to go to the national level and apply them and be very, very deliberate about them, because this is just like investment. This is not expenditure. This is the greatest, biggest investment you can make. And it's not just for productivity and growth. It's also for equality. Like Jonas said, otherwise you're going to have very serious political problems going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Jonas, let's bring you in then on that, because, the WEF Gender Gap report showed an important inequality in industries such as AI, for example, cloud computing. So what can be done about that to close that gap, to try and guarantee that skilling opportunities and future job creation is actually inclusive and diverse? How can that be tackled?
Well, we think that's a really important topic from the perspective of demographics. So most of the developed world and the developing world have declining population growth and workforce increases. Now, the exceptions are, of course, Africa, parts of the Middle East. And whilst Asia still has many countries where the population is growing, by and large, that growth is slowing down dramatically. And of course, that's very true for Europe as well as for North America as well. So the reality is the availability of workforce is shrinking. So purposeful and intentional skills development that includes the inclusion and the diversity of the various talent pools is going to be extremely important. As we all know by now, women are more educated than men, yet are significantly underrepresented, not in the workplace in general, in senior positions for sure, but also then specific industries. So those are the areas, I think, where we can put in extra efforts. But I'd like to come back to what Angel was saying and what President Hajar was highlighting as well. We clearly see that these are country initiatives. You have to take into account the culture of the nation. And to give you an example, a most cited example of how we bring young people in is apprenticeships and the success of apprenticeships in countries like Germany and Austria and Switzerland. Well, one of the differences that you can see in those cultures is somebody completing an apprenticeship, their parents put in ads in the paper congratulating their daughter and their son to having completed their Meister in some specific trade. And that is not a culture that we see in many other countries. So the lack of success, as much as we talk about apprenticeship as being a key, in reality has to be put against what kind of culture do you have in the labor market. So that is an area which, of course, you can apply also to industries and say, what is it culturally that needs to change within the tech industry to attract the great female talent, for instance, that is plentiful and available, yet doesn't feel attracted to that industry. And I think that's going to be a really, really important part of how we start to bridge this divide going forward.
Yeah, I absolutely right. Because, for example, in the UK, we're trying to encourage apprenticeships and encourage employers to provide them, and for young people to want to take them up. And yet there's still this sort of slight stigma surrounding apprenticeships, because it's the feeling is that, if you take an apprenticeship, it's because you couldn't do well at school. You're doing that because you're not bright. It's a funny cultural thing going on in the UK, whereas in Germany it's totally the opposite. As you say, people thrive in apprenticeships, and they've been going on for many, many years. President Hajar, let's talk about this issue of education and the young. You mentioned you've got scholarships in place, or you're encouraging programs that lead to scholarships, and you're encouraging entrepreneurs. But when it comes to, right back at the beginning, when young people are at school, what's happening in your region to encourage the right education so that the young people are going into the right fields, as it were?
So it is a matter of transformation, and it is a matter of changing the mindset and needs certain type of leadership. This is very important. Of course, it is scholarship is very important for building capacity in these countries, because finance by itself will not solve the problems of these countries. And unfortunately, for more than 50 years, all the MDBs still continue and financing projects in these countries, but we are not focusing on building capacity in enough way. But the question now, at what cost we see the reskilling revolution initiative in the current prospect of global economic recovery. And this has left many developing and least developed countries to adapt, for example, to emerging shift of Industry 4.0. However, industrial activities in these countries are usually focused on low mechanization and labor-intensive industry, and there is a massive mismatch between the intent of reskilling and the reality of the industry. And there will be winner and loser in drive towards Industry 4.0. Companies adapting a high level of mechanization may no longer create jobs in developing countries, while certain industrial activities may become more productive regardless of location. So this coupled with lower demand shocks that we are still experiencing due to the pandemic. So these issues really need to be more focused on, and preparing, as I mentioned. We have in the last 2 years, we have communicated with best universities in the world, including Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford. For the first time, we send our students from these countries to these universities, and we encourage them to continue in this field and come back. But as General Secretary mentioned, that unfortunately, the government in some of these countries and the private sector, they don't know exactly what they really need in the coming years. And this is here, it comes the role of the development institutions and the government in order to design the roadmap for these countries and identify the future. And in this direction, in fact, in the last few months, we worked on 5 industries, which we think that 80% of our member countries, they have a comparative advantage in these industries, including petroleum and petrochemical, the textile, construction, finance, and other industries. And we conducted a comprehensive research in these countries in order to identify the comparative advantage sectors that they have comparative advantage, and identify which kind of skills they need in this industry. But this again needs a collaboration between the 5 P's, not just government and private sector. We need cooperation with philanthropists, we need with the people, with NGOs, universities, research centers, and AHO. Thank you.
Thank you, President Hajar. Well, Frida, if we bring you in again, because there's a lot of discussion about there's responsibility on the part of government, employers, but also the individual to be motivated and to want to reskill, as it were. But Frida, I mean, for example, in the United States, there's a huge employment issue there with the pandemic exacerbating the problem. You've got a brand new administration in place, the Biden administration, that's spending trillions on stimulus. Are you confident that the strategy is right, that it's about reskilling, it's about, the right fit for the right person, as you say?
Yes. I mean, obviously, I think the devil is in the details, right? We have to understand better what the actual reskilling initiatives are going to be. I mean, just a little thing on the Biden administration, they've shown a fantastic commitment to science, elevating science to a cabinet level position, and having a deputy scientist, Alejandra Nelson, who's a social scientist. So I think their commitment to that, I think then hopefully will then display a commitment to using sort of the technological resources that we have at our disposal to help with this problem. So, we generally think of technology as an exacerbator of inequality, right? I mean, historically, or at least in the last decade plus, that's what we've seen, right? And I think there's ample evidence for that. However, that doesn't need to be the case. What I would argue is that we can use technology to stitch together training programs with, apprenticeship programs. These initiatives have to be scalable. And the way that we know how to scale things is through the use of technology. And I believe that with the responsible use of these types of technology layers, where we are connecting individuals with opportunity to learn and to reskill, and then to make themselves optimally suited for new work opportunities, I believe that technology will play a big role in that. And I think the beauty of technology is that you can monitor, or you can, if it's done well, you can monitor the impact that it's having, right? So I think obviously there is responsibility at the individual level, but I think we have to sort of break down a lot of the structural barriers that we see when it comes to everyone has their own little, program here, program there. And I don't think we're going to arrive at a national scalable policy if we're doing it that way. I think we have to think of the technological, sort of capabilities that we have to aggregate all of these programs in a way that will make it accessible to individuals who want to reskill and learn. Okay,
thank you very much indeed. So we've just got time for a few more comments. Secretary General Gurria, if we get one final thought from you, and also from Jonas, but Secretary General Gurria, you go first. In order to make the most of the opportunity that we have before us, with the huge pressure on governments to reach environmental goals, climate crisis, etc., that is very much at the forefront of most people's thinking. But when it comes to reskilling a global workforce, what has to be the top priority from your perspective?
We are going to live in an increasingly digital world. We are going to live in an increasingly, in an environment of heavy technology, and therefore the workforce will have to adapt to that. Otherwise, they will be left out. It's as simple as that. Now, the fact that we are still in a transformation where we haven't had massive, massive loss of jobs due to technology, is because right now it's a mess in terms of the numbers. It's a mess in terms of how many really are unemployed, how many people were left out, how many SMEs are going to be, are going to die finally, and how many loans are going to be non-performing loans. We are right now in a period where we know very little about the ultimate consequences of the pandemic. But we were moving in a very clear direction, and that is digital, and that is numeric, that is more and more technology, and therefore it's very simple. You just have to roll with the punches. You have to train the students, and it's again not about education, because you were asking Sally about education per se. It's skills is a combination of education, vocational training. It is about perception. It is about obviously what is happening in the future. And again, not because you're going to have the skills that are required in the announcement in the newspapers today, but because you can actually go there and talk about yourself and about the skills that you have acquired. And they will say, okay, this person with a little bit of training, specialized training, will be a good fit. This is the idea. The idea is not to have simply diplomas anymore. You were mentioning Germany. Well, a few years ago, everybody wanted to be Germany, and everybody wanted to learn about the apprenticeships. Now, the difference between the skills that are required to be an apprentice and the skills that are required to be an expert in something, whatever, are being blurred. And basically, with technology and with the digital revolution going on, you just have to adapt the training programs of education systems, but also of the companies themselves. Companies, enterprises have an enormous responsibility here. And of course, ideally, and there probably Germany is the best example, the coordination between the governments, the trade unions, and the workers themselves, either individually, or the workers as in form of trade unions, and the enterprises is absolutely crucial.
Jonas, if you could just give us your final thoughts as well, at a time when governments, business leaders and individuals were all under so much pressure. We're just trying to get through every day at the moment, aren't we, it would seem. How can you encourage all the relevant players to think we've got to think reskilling? It's not about preservation of the now, it's about the future.
It is about the future, Sally. And I think, the first one from a government and policymakers perspective is to embrace this as a change that needs to happen based on science and data, just as we are now seriously getting engaged in the climate issues. So same enabling mechanisms to transform from a job security to employment security. I think Frida made a great point in terms of the social skills, really showing that this can be done. And the World Economic Forum, together with PwC, also released a report called Upskilling for Shared Prosperity, which talks about exactly the same thing. This is doable if we put our minds to it and if we really focus our efforts and resources. But lastly, I would say we talk very often about this in abstract terms. It's the labor market, it's the workforce. In the end, to shift this, we need to address the people. And the people need to see that with incremental changes, with a clear purpose, they can improve their skill sets enough to make a little bit more money in industries that have good growth prospects. And it is incumbent on us as leaders in the private sector, as policymakers, and all the enablers in educational institutions to explain what that path looks like. Because I think that is a great frustration for many people. They say, yeah, we hear you. I am a forklift driver and I should be a programmer, but I have no idea how that would happen. Frankly, I don't think that's what it's going to take. It's going to take incremental skills over time for many people. And that's going to be the task that we need to sort of get behind and really start to think about in a much more people-centric way than, talking about this in more non-pragmatic terms.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have to say we are out of time, which is such a shame because it's been such an interesting, informative and a challenging discussion as well. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who contributed. I didn't read out names when I was putting questions to you, but many of them came from people who have been watching us this afternoon. So Secretary General Angel Gurria, President Bandar Hajar, Frida Pauli and Jonas Priesing, thank you all for your contributions. And before we finish this off, I just want to hand over to Sadia Zahidi, who is, of course, from the World Economic Forum, who's been listening as well. Sadia, over to you.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you so much. It's been such a rich discussion that I won't attempt to synthesize, but I'll share a couple of takeaways that I think really struck me. One, I think we all agree that many of these trends were happening already, but they have become supercharged, and we now have to face them because they are front and center of the current debate. And if we don't, there is the risk of further fragmentation, growing inequality. And so this is really something that has to be taken forward. And even to address other global challenges, such as climate change, ensuring that people have income security, have faith in the opportunities that are available to them, have the ability to reskill and upskill themselves, all of this will be critical. Now, there is an economic case for it. I think that also came through very much in the conversation. This is not just an expenditure, this is actually an investment. And the report that Jonas referred to, it indicates that we could add $6 trillion to the global economy through upskilling investments alone by 2030, simply because of the returns that that can generate. So this is very much an investment. That same case exists at a business level as well. And we have to do this at scale, and we have to make it very practical. We have to make it global, national, and sector specific. That is the aim of the Reskilling Revolution platform, the 1 billion people that it's trying to reach by 2030. Over this last year, I'm very pleased to report that we were able to reach 50 million people across multiple countries and sectors with improved skills. But more importantly, it's about setting up those long-lasting systems that can continue to provide that lifelong learning and reskilling and upskilling. Currently set up in 10 countries, expanding to 6 more over the course of 2021. Currently set up in 10 industries, expanding to more. And importantly, creating a new taxonomy for skills. If we want to do this at a global level, we have to ensure that the global workforce can talk to each other, that what it means to have AI skills in one country means the same as what it means to have AI skills in another country. And that's another piece that was released this week, a global skills taxonomy that will be working with multiple training providers and countries and businesses to work towards adoption. With that, I have only to say that thank you so much to you and to the Reskilling Revolution champions and all of the work that they're doing through this platform. Thank you, Sally, for your excellent moderation. Thank you, Secretary General Gurria. Thank you, President Hajar. Thank you, Jonas, and thank you, Frida.